Peter, thank you so much for accepting this invitation to chat today, this morning. Israel and Palestine hit the headlines again over the past few days, and many young people and YMCA leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean are wondering, what is happening. They would like to learn more about the situation. So we would love for you to share with us your perspective on, what's happening, and give us a few key points that help us understand the current situation in Palestine and Israel.
Sure. So the recent, thank you, Antonio. The recent flare-up is a result of, it started on the first days of Ramadan. So Ramadan is a very holy month for Muslims. So Jerusalem is significant during Ramadan as well, and prayers at Al-Aqsa are accepted and encouraged, and it's a part of the culture and the tradition. So you normally you would go to Al-Aqsa, and afterwards you stay around the old city, and there is the Damascus Gate, which is the main entrance for East Jerusalem, main entrance for the Palestinian neighborhoods into the old city. And the steps of that is where young people hang out. So they were cordoned off. And it was perceived by residents of the city as a way of not respecting the tradition because it's a Palestinian one. And there is an attitude of Jerusalem is Jewish. And therefore, we have to accept that. We have the freedom of religion in our churches and mosques, but we don't have the freedom of expression. So as a result of this, the youth started clashing with the police who would prevent them from sitting. And it has spiraled out of control into what's happened today. After simultaneously what's been happening as well is there's been a court case in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, which is a normal Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem. It's about 3 minutes walk from the YMCA where all of this is happening. So we're about halfway in between Sheikh Jarrah and Damascus Gate. So the families were refugees. They lost their homes in 1948 in what was West Jerusalem. And they were, through a deal with the Jordanian government, they were settled in houses. These houses were Jewish properties, I believe, that were evacuated, as far as I know. And what happens is that when Israel took over East Jerusalem, they passed a law that allows Jews to reclaim property lost in the war, but not Palestinians. So as a result, this helped start a settlement movement into East Jerusalem, which is happening in Silwan, which is right next to the Western Wall entrance of the old city. And it's happening in Sheikh Jarrah. And there have been protests there. I pass by them on every Friday. There's a mix of Israeli and Palestinian activists who rally, about a dozen, 15 at most, 20 sometimes. And they rally. But when it coincided with what happened at the stairs of Damascus gates, so once the barricades were removed from Damascus gates, the youth did not settle down. They wanted to show solidarity to Sheikh Jarrah, and therefore they continued to not riot, but they continued to flare with the police, to clash with the police. They throw bottles and rocks at armored police. And the police respond with stun grenades, tear gas, rubber bullets, sponge-tip bullets. And these are normal, and they get children, 16, 17, 18, 19, are being hit in the face, in the back, directly. These weapons are meant to bounce off the ground and into you. You see, if a little child does something to provoke the police, they'll take a stun grenade and throw it. So Antonio, you've been to the old city, very narrow streets. Imagine in Ramadan with thousands of worshippers. So what happens is that the canister rolls in between a family, and women or children have a bomb explode, a stun grenade explode between their legs. And it's frightening. And what's happening is that these youth are no longer afraid of the police. They don't care. and they don't want to stop. So this has been an ongoing clash now, and there was shows of solidarity inside of Israeli cities. And on one of the evenings, I believe, according to what I heard in the news at least, that residents of Lid, which is a Palestinian city next to the airport in Israel, well, it's a mixed city today. It used to be only a Palestinian city, but inside the mixed city, there was rioting. They were going towards a building that had the organization. So there are organizations in Israel that promote Jewish takeover of Palestinian neighborhoods so that they can slowly empty out Arabs and reclaim proper in what they believe is a reclamation of property to Jews. So what happened is on their way there was a scuffle with the residents, and one of the youth was shot. 2 were shot, 1 was killed. The second was critical, but he survived. And so what's happening in these 2 main cities, Acre and Lidda, which is Lid and Akka, it's a revenge. It's blood for blood. And what happened is gangs of Jewish extremists started also tit for tat. So it's become, stop an Arab driver and hit him, stop a Jewish driver and hit him. And things are going crazy. It's now we have clashes about 5 minutes away from my house. So we're smart. We know we've lived through this. We're not this bad, never this bad, to be honest. This time it's really fueled with just the feeling of supremacy and racism, and you are nothing, you belong to nothing. I mean, we had Saturday of Lights. So I'm Anglican, but the tradition is the nice tradition is in the Orthodox Easter in Jerusalem. Most Palestinians are Orthodox. So there's usually a nice, it's kind of, they do the same thing that you do in a wedding. So they have chants and cheers, for Christ, for the resurrection. And it's a big festivity, and there's scouts and everything. So you go, and there's a police barricade at the entrance of the old city. Why? Deals also with the churches. It's also the church's fault that they asked that they could have their own volunteers maybe help, and that would be a little bit more humane to the people. The problem is the attitude of the police. And the people want to go in. They don't understand why they're not being let in the old city to go to the church. And every 5-10 minutes, they let a few people in. So one of the police officers handed me water. And at the same time, they pushed an old man, and he went and he fell to the ground. He hit them, and they took him in. And there's always tension when you do this. So there's no point to do this. There's a clever way of doing this. If you respect the people, when there is Jewish prayers, there's never a scuffle, because the system is designed to be respectful to the worshippers. The problem of living under occupation or living under sort of a nationalist system that only recognizes one people is that there's no respect to you. So what happened is my wife and daughter were eventually pushed in. My daughter got hit in the barricades and had her arm scratched, and somebody stomped on her foot. She's 9. And they were let in while me and the other twin were left outside the barricade. And he's like, you can't come in. So my other daughter started crying. Eventually, the policeman took my daughter at least and gave her to her mother. And then eventually, I told them at this point, that's fine. Whenever you want to let me in, let me in. At least my daughters are in the shade. And I was let in after 5 minutes. It made no difference to crowdedness. There was no stampede. The streets were empty after the checkpoint. So no point to do this. They have some lessons learned to be taken from all of this, but it's not going to stop because it's part of the system. And this is what we've become used to, and this is what these demonstrations are about.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it, Peter, because I think very few people understand that even though in the international community continues to be, there are talks and probably a general understanding that people are working towards a two-state solution. Reality is that during this time, Israel has created almost like a de facto one state with two legal frameworks, that people don't experience equal rights, equal opportunities. Can you speak about it a little bit? And also, I'd like for people to understand about the settlements. If you can explain about the settlements, because those Israeli settlements are getting deeper and deeper into Palestinian territory, which also makes this idea of a two-state solution almost impossible right now. So can you talk about the settlements, this occupation, the inequalities that exist in the rights between Palestinians, Israelis, etc.?
The settlement enterprise is established by Israelis for two main reasons. One reason, and this is quoting Perez, one reason is to settle on the border communities and push the West Bank further in, giving more space because it's tight in central Israel where the majority of Israeli population is, a sort of a strategic defense decision. The other, which is the main point of it, is when it expands inward, is to cut off any hopes of creating a Palestinian state. Wherever there is contiguous Jewish neighborhoods, they will be absorbed into Israel. And so the idea is, you settle, you take what you can, and you limit Palestinian expansion. So there were two types of settlements. One's on the borders, one's around the cities. And eventually you start plugging in between. In 2001 or 2000, Sharon called on the youth to go take the hilltops of the West Bank. And I don't know the number of illegal outposts that were established today, but till today they're there. And they grow. And so about 60% of the West Bank is Area C, which is under full Israeli civil and legal and security control. So as Oslo, the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem, which is part of the West Bank, but the West Bank was commissioned into areas A, B, and C. So A is under full Palestinian civil and security control. B is under Palestinian civil, but under Israeli security control. And C is both Israeli and both Israeli security and civil control. So the majority of settlements are in Area C. The majority of Palestinian populations are confined in Area A, which makes, I believe, about 9% of the West Bank, or 11% of the West Bank. So in total, the Palestinian villages and the Palestinian cities make up about 40% of the West Bank. And the rest is cordoned off for settlements, and the areas surrounding the security parameters as well, surrounding the settlements that, the hamper farmers from developing their land and having access to their land freely. It has to be done in coordination with the civil government. So you have to go to the military office and request permission to enter your land. So if they don't show up, you have to go again. And the poor reality of it is most of them are 18-year-olds, conscript into an army. And, I personally, feel I don't want to send my kids to an army at 18. I wish for them, I hope someday this all ends. So this is the settlement enterprise. The other side of it is Jerusalem was annexed by the municipality of Jerusalem. So I'm born in Jerusalem. So I hold a Jerusalem identification card, which means I'm a resident of Jerusalem, but I'm not a citizen of Israel. Unfortunately, there's about 5 stages to this. So you're either, if you're an Israeli citizen who's also Jewish, then you have the right to, as a Jew, you have the right to immigrate to Israel anytime you want. You can keep any other nationality you have. It's a birthright that you have as a Jew. Arab Israelis, as per the national laws, which is in Israeli law passed by the Knesset as the national law, they don't have the right to self-determine. The only people who have the right to self-determination in Israel is for Jews. And so Palestinians in Israel have civil rights, but they don't have national rights. Palestinians of East Jerusalem, we have only residency, which can be revoked. Imagine you have the status of an immigrant in the place where you were born and your father and grandfather, etc. So we have instability in terms of this, and we have no civil or, we have limited civil laws, civil rights, and we have no national rights whatsoever. And we don't belong to the Palestinian Authority either. So we're sort of stuck in between. The West Bankers, they have easier relations in terms of getting permits to work into Israel. There's more of a also economic relationship there. So they are not allowed into Jerusalem, not allowed into Israel without a permit. So this has disconnected East Jerusalem from the rest of the Palestinian territories. And if they wed an Israeli, they're not allowed to receive citizenship. So an Arab cannot pass a citizenship to an Arab. A Jew is automatically given citizenship. So if I have to go through a naturalization process, while Jews have a process called Aliyah, which allows them to just within a year receive citizenship. And then you have Gaza. At least the West Bank has some limited control and limited access to freedom of movement outside of to Jordan. And Palestinians in the West Bank are under a military occupation. So they go to a military court, which has a conviction rate of 99.6%. And they are policed by the army, etc. Unless you're under Palestinian areas, and you're policed by the Palestinian police. And then you have Gaza, and Gazans very rarely will get permission to leave to work which is the current situation, the blockade on Gaza as well in terms of movements of goods, etc. Israel has security control over the West Bank, so at least there's a facilitation for economic sort of give and take. But in Gaza, it's done completely through a border, through access. There is an economic relationship. But,
Israel controls access by air, sea, and also by land. Yeah. And there is one additional group to those that you have described, which are the refugees, right? Either refugees in your own land, but also many refugees still living in Jordan or Lebanon or other countries, Egypt, without any right to come back, right?
The majority of Palestinians are refugees. In 1948, 85% of Palestinians became refugees. There are refugees within Israel themselves. They even fled from a village, let's say, to Nazareth. So they're technically also refugees as well. And they're not allowed to go back to their homes. So they lost their property. So again, the laws here don't apply. This is what's happened. This is why there's a call at Sheikh Zarah and demonstrations and solidarity. Refugee camps in Gaza is mostly refugees, about 70-80% refugees. The West Bank has a sizable refugee population, Jordan as well, and Jordan is about 80%, I think, Palestinian. And then you have refugee camps in Syria. Most prominent example is Yarmouk, which was demolished in the Syrian civil war. And you have camps in Lebanon. And the Palestinians number about, I think, 13 something million. There's about close to 6.5 within Israel proper and the West Bank in Gaza. And there's about, the rest are in refugee camps or in Europe, South America. There's a sizable Palestinian population in Chile. The football team, Palestino.
We know them.
So I have cousins and I have family in Venezuela and Caracas. They're from Bethlehem originally. And so we always, as Palestinians, we always look to Central America. We love football. People here mostly, we mostly support Brazil and Argentina. The people love Messi. People love I think between also the Latin culture and which is so also shares a Mediterranean culture and Palestinian Mediterranean. So there are things in common, and we have the same fears, we have the same problems as well, and we have the same sort of culture. We're warmer to each other. The food is very important, and
family.
Family.
And we also, in Spanish, we keep, some words that actually come from Arabic. So
Yes.
Even there you can see the influence. Peter, I think this is great, and it's really helping us understand the context and the situation. Now, I would like for you to share more about the YMCA. You know, the East Jerusalem YMCA. Personally, I've always find it a story of inspiration. You know, from how you started in a refugee camp. I always love that picture in your office. You know, with the tent where the YMCA started. Can you share more about, you know, the Y in East Jerusalem, the East Jerusalem YMCA, and the work you've been doing, you know, the challenges operating in this environment, how you have served young people over the past decades, and also how you are supporting young people during the current situation?
Sure. So in the YMCA came to Palestine in 1889, I believe, in Jaffa Gate in the Old City. Then they bought the land, which is currently opposite the David Hotel in Ma'manillah neighborhood at the time. And the building, I believe, was inaugurated by General Allenby in 1933. And it's still a beautiful building. So that was the YMCA of Palestine. And my personal connection to this, because my grandfather used to work there. He was the CFO of the YMCA. And during the problems in 47, 48, he sort of, he had a prominent role. And eventually they lost access to the west part of the city when Jerusalem was divided between east and west. So in October, 5 of those employees, including my grandfather, went to Jericho, which was the biggest refugee camp because it was on its way to Jordan. Mm-hmm. And they set up a tent and they started doing education and sports, activities for children, etc., at the refugee camps and basic education. Until UNRWA started doing that, which is the UN agency commissioned to be in charge of the refugees. Once they were commissioned and they started doing schools, they started a vocational school in 1951. In 1952, we had our first cohorts, graduates. We have graduated 70 cohorts since. Till today, we are in the refugee camp. So we are a refugee country, a refugee population, and our YMCA, therefore, fits the bill as well as it's part of the community. So it's also a refugee YMCA. In 1953, we moved back to Jerusalem. There was a building that belonged to the friend of the YMCA, which was, on the other side of the city. So through connections from old work, etc., they were able to buy the building, and it had a little hostel, some vocational workshops in the back, and there's a church, the Anglican church across the way, and the YMCA and the church the church ran a school which had courts. The YMCA fixed the courts and ran the courts, and so there was shared courts as well, and outdoor space. And from there, they went also to Bet Sahur. There was a property that belonged to the YMCA from about in the 20s and in the 30s. That was given over to we used to be called the YMCA of Jerusalem. So, and we were part of under Jerusalem, Jordan at the time, and Jordan administered the West Bank until 1967. And so when we moved to Jerusalem, we fundraised for a big building, which is our headquarters today, where my office is. And we continue to do sports activities. The YMCA had actually in the 70s, they were the strongest athletic team, the best soccer team, the best basketball team, and the best swimming teams. The YMCA played major roles. And that happened all the way through until 1986 as a result of Lebanon, and there's a downward trend in tourism, and the Y was mostly dependent on tourists in its hotel, so they had to give up the teams. And then in 87, there was the first Intifada. And in comes a popular uprising where youth are throwing stones against a fortified army, and they're being shot. And there was and eventually it made Israel look bad to shoot kids with live bullets. So they issued an order, and it's Hak Rabin, the peacemaker, issued this order. And he issued an order that you break the bones of youth, rock throwing youth, if you capture them. So the YMCA started the rehabilitation program in the winter of 1988-89. And this program came to look at not only the physical trauma, but the psychological trauma that these youth suffer as a result of their disabilities, of their physical disabilities. And so we started what has become a very holistic program where we work with youth who are traumatized from political violence. We work with them, we counsel them, and if they're able to go back to school, then we help them go back to school. If they are unable to go back to school, then we help them take up a vocation. So a little note here to add is that in the West Bank, because they are under military law, so you can be tried as an adult from 12. And youth can spend from 12 to 16 in jail. So when he comes out at 16, sometimes it's very difficult to put him back in school. So you have to help him get a vocation instead. And the idea is to give him something, because these youth while they are strong and they act tough, and they're still youth, and they have fears that they don't deal with, that they suppress. And this and along with a very hateful environment, so this leads to anger, and it could lead to extremism.
Yeah.
So we work with these youth to make sure they don't deviate to the margins, that they stay within the mainstream of society, that they are contributing members to society. We don't want our kids in jail. We don't want our kids in conflict. We wish to be free. We wish our voice to be heard. It's just a shame that this is unfortunately the only way anybody ever hears our voice. Without this, there is very little attention paid to Palestine. So, and this is what the youth learn, and this is the only way they can express themselves. So this program is still going on today in Bet Sahur, and it's spread throughout the West Bank: Jenin, Tul Karam, Nablus, Ramallah, Tuba, and Bethlehem and Hebron. So we work, and we also work with people with disabilities, and we work on the psychological aspect of the disability as well. And so we believe in empowering kids to believe in themselves, to build character for themselves. We had a program that was initially designed to encourage female enrollment into the vocational school in Jericho, and has since become a very, very successful program for promoting women leadership. And it's the Women Development Program that we have. They work on the basis of local-led action and community-led action. And the idea is to empower the community to understand what the community needs, design the interventions, and then let them deal with it. And they set up protection groups. And I'll explain. So today their role would be to help people out in their villages, they facilitate things. So if there's any incursions, they also know how to, they help out with, they know how to help each other out. We work as well with, because most men go to work during the day, so the women are left in the villages as well by themselves. So they have to, if they learn how to deal with sort of run the municipalities sort of type of. So we are in 26 locations so far, in 26 remote villages and poor marginalized villages in the West Bank. We also have a joint program with the YW as well on advocacy. We have the Olive Tree campaign where you can support and purchase a tree, and it's planted, it's sent to a farmer to help him claim their land. There's laws here that are, if you work your land, you can't lose it. So by helping a farmer plant trees in his land and work it in areas that are hard to access as well, it's a way for people to continue to maintain ownership of their land when they are unable to, and it's a way of being resilient. And we have 3 community centers that are in Ramallah, Jerusalem, and Bet Sahur. Jerusalem has been open since 1952-53. Bet Sahur opened in 2003, and Ramallah opened in 2017. Currently, Jerusalem and Bet Sahur are closed because of Corona, but we're getting ready to open back up. We'll see how things go now. You can't plan for anything here. And we try to play, we have the gym and swim, but we also try to do more cultural things and to be a safe platform for youth to be away from the streets so that they're not exposed to all of this hopefully we can delay that as often as possible. And we continue to pray for peace. But it's difficult to work under these circumstances. There are lynchings and crazy mobs in the streets. And my wife is worried when I go to work, to be honest. The East Jerusalem YMCA is on the seam line. And so I have to go in front of Israeli neighborhoods to get to my parking spot. And if there's a group of youth there, I could be lynched. So the police have no control. They don't stop anything. Throughout the West Bank now, there are demonstrations, and this also hampers our ability to access people who are in need. And all of this violence. So again, we have psychosocial first care. So we have a lot of work to do. We were very busy in, helping youth of Jerusalem, and we're very busy now. Today there is in Nablus, Ramallah, Bethlehem, Hebron. There's throughout the West Bank, there are demonstrations. So we try to we work with incarcerated children as well who are released. And children detention can unfortunately be sometimes as young as 5 and 6 years old. They're not held overnight. But it's extremely scary for a 5-year-old to be put in an army jeep and taken away from his family for 2 to 3 hours and then released. It's just crazy that this happens. But sometimes, again, 18-year-old youth with guns who are taught that, we only hate them and we want to kill them. And that's not really the case. We just wish to have, the rights and we're ready for there's wide acceptance for a 2-state solution, but they've never let that happen. And I don't know where this goes from now, but it's really spiraling out of control and it's scary. So for all people, not just for us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, how is it for the YMCA being a Christian organization? How is the YMCA perceived, as a Christian organization in this context, in this environment? You work in the West Bank, which is majority a Muslim population. You also have to, you need to be aware of how, the Israeli government may perceive you because you are working with young people and with Palestinian youth. How is the YMCA perceived in this context?
Sure. So I want to remind you of the last time you came to visit me.
I know. I was there.
So as Antonio was arriving, we were stormed by undercover agents and the local intelligence and the Israeli police for receiving a $60,000 grant to renovate our pool. They thought we were doing a nationalistic thing for the Palestinian Authority. We don't do politics. We are open to help out our community. We can't accept or work under the premise of these youth have anger and they have the right to express what they are angry about. So this is our relationship in Jerusalem. As far as being Christian in a Muslim community, we don't feel it too much. There's a lot of Christians that have left. So we used to be 33% of Palestine in 1948. Today we are under 1%. In the West Bank, there's about 50,000 Christians. In Jerusalem, which was dominantly Christian at the turn of the 20th century, today has less than about 5,500 Christians left. So me and my wife and my daughters make up about 8% of our church. That's how we have people in our congregation. Almost people I went to school with have immigrated. And it's not because of Palestinian Muslim Christian relations. It's because of the pressures of the occupation. So we feel we have a brotherhood. We both are treated the same. It's not a matter of, it's not a Jewish Muslim problem. It's a identity of the Zionist doctrine that this is a Jewish country, and therefore, if you're not Jewish, you have to be Christian as well. And if you don't toe the line of accepting the entire narrative, then you're not going to have an easy time. Bethlehem used to be a dominantly Christian city. Ramallah used to be a Christian city as well. Again, the numbers are down, but they've always had. There's always been both Christian and Muslim involvement in rejecting the occupation, rejecting the ethnic cleansing that occurred in 1948, etc. 20% of Palestinian refugees were Christian. Mm-hmm. So a lot of Christians. The town of Lidda now, where all this is happening, was a Christian town back in 1948. So now you find a few residents that are Christian, but the majority are Jewish and Muslim. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult, in terms of we're always Arab at the end of the day. So in terms of our relations with Israel, that's sort of a line we understand. In terms of with our Muslim population, 99% of our beneficiaries as well as are Muslims. Mm-hmm. And they welcome us. They appreciate the solidarity. It's a very neighborly relationship. It's being part of the same community. We don't feel strange in the community. Mm-hmm. They call us the salt of the earth, and we give flavor to the place. And we're part of the fabric of society as well. So we're not, it's not as if we get this question in the why sometimes, how do you're open to give services to Muslims? No. We're open to give services to our community. They happen to be Muslim. We have Christians as well who we give services to, but there aren't that many.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to highlight that I always appreciate about the work you guys do is in this hostile environment, as you said, where young people find little opportunities, there is anger. You always, I think all the young people that come to the YMCA, get a sense of belonging, which is very important, in times of polarization, in times of, divisive rhetoric in the media and the politics. I always find that hopeful, It gives a lot of hope to see that young people can still find a sense of belonging and can find hope through some of the programs that you guys are doing. And Peter, I know I'm taking a lot of your time and it is evening for you. I like for you to share with us, for the YMCA leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also our young people, how can we support the East Jerusalem YMCA during these times? Is there anything we can do, or how do we support the young people of that is going through this current situation?
So we have so we are able to we have programs that are set up that are there to help. So anything that aids the programs to run is always appreciated. But that's the last thing I ask for. Most importantly for us is, I know it's Corona time, so it's horrible to make this suggestion, but visit us. Come to Palestine, visit Bethlehem, visit Ramallah, go to a refugee camp, walk through it. You don't need an invitation. They'll be very nice and warm to you. I know, Antonio can tell you about his experience as well. We're very hospitable people, sometimes annoyingly hospitable as well. So come visit us, go to Hebron, go see the reality in Jerusalem. And this system is flawed. And so this is the best way for you to understand, because what you see on TV cannot reflect, you cannot understand the volume of discrimination and the levels of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable and how limited the freedoms really are. Because on the surface of it, you see people walking around. The details of it is what's really important, and it's very difficult to explain the details. So we encourage you to come. We encourage you to read about the problem. And there are different ways that you can support. I leave those to you. I don't like to call for political action. Mm-hmm. But I encourage you always to justice. I'll say this though: justice cannot. this injustice cannot sustain itself. Anything that's built on such injustice just doesn't work. And these frequent clashes are just a manifestation of this. People are inherently good, so they will always reject this. This is why generation after generation will continue to reject the reality. It's great that youth today care a lot more about social justice. They care about the environment, and they go together. It's not just to have good weather and save the oceans as well. We need to save each other from each other. And it's crazy that people can really hate each other to this degree. That's not good. And it's happening worldwide as well. And if we stop one injustice, maybe the rest of the tyrants will be aware as well that that there is a cost to limiting people, to limiting freedom, to discrimination. That it doesn't ever have to be violent. I don't like that, and we never call for that. Unfortunately, sometimes that happens, but that should never happen. But we call for, so we tell you, please learn more about us. Read what you can. Read about the creation. Read about the refugee problem, which is essentially the bottom of the issue. Irrespective of what's biblically written here and there, but also the words of Jesus never called to treat people unfairly. The proverb of the Good Samaritan shows that you treat strangers, that strangers take care of each other as well, that they're all the same people. Love thy enemy as thyself. So it's part of some people who use the revelations to sort of justify any of this. Think of the words of Jesus and think if he would support bloodshed in his name ever, or the injustice, or the tears of a child. And you didn't die on that cross for nothing. So this is the message I leave you with.
Wow, thank you, Peter. That's a very powerful message. And thank you again for the opportunity to chat and help our friends, YMCA leaders and young people in Latin America and the Caribbean understand the current situation, but also how the YMCA has been serving communities. I also, as you said, encourage people to read, to visit, and to, make their own opinions, because often, what we get on the media is not the whole story, sadly. We often get very subjective, or very partial information, and it is important that we open our minds and our hearts to read more and understand more what is happening. So hopefully one day there is going to be a solution, and we will all live in peace in Palestine, in Israel, and in Latin America as well, that we are also experiencing right now our own challenges. So Peter, thank you so much again for your time, for the opportunity to chat. I appreciate it. Again, I always find the story of the East Jerusalem YMCA a very inspiring story that gives us a lot of pride about the work of the YMCA. And also want to thank you for your leadership and your commitment. Working under those circumstances is not easy. It takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of commitment. It takes sometimes risk in your own life and your family. So please know from the bottom of our hearts that we appreciate the work you are doing.
Thank you. For us, that's the worst part of it. For us, this is normal.
We shouldn't, sadly, we can't normalize it.
Yeah, it's become 40 years of this. So we know how to avoid it, and you got to turn away and continue moving. We have to continue to serve these children, and we have to hold out hope as long as we can, so that when there is justice and there is peace and there is a Palestinian state, we have a strong community led by youth.
Mm-hmm. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Well, thank you, Peter. Again, please give my greetings to your family. Yes. Please give my greetings to your family, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, and thank you to LACA and all YMCAs in Latin America and Caribbean. Bye.
Bye, Peter. Bye-bye.